All right, hello, welcome everybody to today's workshop. I hope you're doing very well, and I wanted to hop on today and talk to you about some things that, every time I do these workshops, they're based on some of the questions that I get as people are coming into the group. So if you remember, when you first joined the group, you were probably asked some questions like, what's your number one question about retirement, something like that. And I continue to get the question, over and over about, budgeting or just basic setup, and really just having a good understanding of what we need in retirement. And so I continue to see this over and over. So I figured let's bring it up today and let's talk about it. And for those of you that have ever spoke with me before on one of our consultations, it's one of the things that I'm almost always going to ask, which is, do you know what your income need should be for retirement? So for those that don't know me, my name is Jason Hamilton. I'm a certified financial planner and the founder of Keep It Simple Financial Planning. And I'm also the founder of this group here in this page. So I want to welcome you if this is your first time. And generally every Sunday, we're going to do a workshop with you. And what I try to address is some of the most prominent questions that I get from people that, are just what I'm speaking to, in recent conversations. So the topics do jump around a little bit, but it's really trying to do my best to address your most prominent questions. So one of the thing I keep, I always ask people is, do you know what your income need is going to be for retirement, right? And I find that some people, have a bit of a kind of a yellow pad maybe. They've written some things down on. Once in a while, I'll get somebody who's maybe even a bigger nerd than I am, and they have, a big old fancy spreadsheet all mapped out. But what I find even with those folks is that a lot of times they're missing some crucial details which can make a big difference, on things like your income need down in the future. So we're going to talk about this today. I'm going to go through some things here that I see, try to give you a format and kind of a step-by-step guide on how to approach this, what to think about, and ideally, help you take really the first big step you need to question or to answer the question, are you ready to retire? I think with all this COVID-19 craziness going on, most people are asking themselves more and more, do I have enough to retire? Can I do it? I think they're also feeling a little bit stressed out that, their accounts may look good today because things have basically come back since our February, March type of dip when we had the first news of the coronavirus. And then we have the election coming up, right? So I think a lot of people are a little bit in stress mode there. But what I want you to think about as well is that your retirement is not going to be, 1 or 2 years, hopefully, right? Hopefully you have much longer. We're talking, more like planning for 20, 25, 30, or even beyond amount of years for retirement. So when it comes to expenses, again, like I mentioned, there are some big things that I think most people leave out. And so I want to talk to you about those today. So hopefully everyone can hear. And as always, if you have questions along the way, feel free to drop those in the chat box there, and I try to monitor those and make sure that I can get to those before our call's over today, or our workshop, I should say, not our call. So let's jump in a little bit here. So if I were to ask you personally, what is your income need for retirement? How many people could answer with 100% confidence they know exactly what they're going to need for income and retirement? I would love to hear from you in the comments if you could tell me with 100% confidence. Okay, if you're somebody that is answering that they do know with 100% confidence, I could tell you unequivocally that you are probably 100% wrong, right? The best we can do, we're talking about a 20 or 30 year time period here, right? So it's very unlikely you're going to know exactly what you need, but it is very likely that you can do a good projection and then over the years be able to make minor adjustments if you get the foundational pieces right, okay? So that's what I want to talk about today. Yeah, so getting a couple people here saying not fully confident, I'm 7 years out, no clue. Right, so this is what we're going to talk about today. So I want you to take today's workshop and the information we're going to talk about and some of the things that I recommend and to sit down this week and make this the one thing you do this week to actually address your retirement needs, okay? So, where do we start, okay? The way I look at it, and I put this in the comment for this video as well, but the way I look at retirement, you can look at your expenses. They can be really broken down into two main categories, okay? You could put 3 or 4, honestly, but let's talk about just 2 to make it real simple. You're going to have one, which is your longevity expenses, okay? Your longevity expenses. So longevity expenses are basically the base expenses you're going to have almost all the way throughout retirement. Okay, some of this is subject to change, but in general, you're going to have similar taxes on your home. If you have a mortgage on your home, that if you're going into retirement with a mortgage, that might get paid off at some point, so that might end. If you're somebody who just got a house, which I more and more commonly see at 60 or 62, you're probably going to have a mortgage for your whole retirement. So that would be part of your longevity expenses. So, housing, medical and other insurance, basic food costs, those things are going to remain relatively consistent outside of the inflation costs that, things do go up over time. The second thing, which is much more highly variable and more controllable, are your lifestyle expenses, okay? So lifestyle expenses are going to be things like vacations, toys that you may want to get, eating out, going, just enjoying time with friends and seeing family. Those are things that are going to be a little more flexible, and they're going to be more fluid depending on what stage of retirement that you're in, okay? So when you go to map out your expenses, I want you to think about longevity expenses and lifestyle expenses. Okay, so longevity and lifestyle, those two things. Okay, and then we're gonna take those two categories, and we're gonna then take our whole retirement period, and we can break this up in a relatively simple way to try to make more sense of this whole equation here. And we're gonna call our first period in retirement our go-go years, right? So that's our initial years. So usually somewhere between 1 to 10. For most people, it's somewhere between 5 and 10 years. So let's say 62 to 72 or 65 to 75, that type of period. Like once you leave work, you're probably going to do the majority of your most active, task or the most active things you're going to do in those years, right? Once we get to kind of mid-70s and later, things typically slow down. So we call the first years the go-go years because those are the most active years. We're kind of getting out and about, getting all those vacations in, seeing all the family, spending a lot of time doing things that you always wanted to do before you had the time to do them, right? That's kind of the general place to start. And then the next period in retirement is called the slow go years, right? So it still means you're doing activities, you're still probably doing things, traveling, seeing family and things like that. But this is usually somewhere, about the 10 to 20 year mark in retirement. So kind of, early 70s to early 80s, that type of thing, somewhere in that range. And that's going to be where you're still probably have a little bit more than just your base longevity. You're going to have some lifestyle expenses, but your longevity is probably still going to be the same, and your lifestyle expenses will probably go down during this period, right? And then we have period 3. Okay, and period 3 is kind of the no-go years. So this is a part no one ever wants to talk about, but at some point we're all going to age, right? And we're going to get to a point in our age and our health where we may be a lot less active. We may not be able to go and hike mountains like we could, in our late 50s and early 60s. We may not be able to go on the big crazy vacations that are all around the world. This will be more of a time when mostly when families probably coming to visit you. You may do some, trips, but most folks end up staying more local, hanging out with friends and family that are more in their local area. So we call those kind of your no-go years. And there, your lifestyle expenses go down, but a lot of times your longevity expenses can go up, right? So we're going to kind of break down some of this stuff, but I wanted to start with a high-level kind of framework for what we're going to talk about today. So expense-wise, you're going to look at longevity, which is mostly fixed cost, and then lifestyle, which is mostly variable cost. Okay, those are the two expense categories I'd like you to break your expenses down in. And then we're going to have 3 periods that I want you to plan for. So period 1 is going to be your go-go years, so those are busy years. Period 2 is going to be your slow-go years. Those are still active, but not quite as busy. And then we're going to have period 3, which will be your no-go years, which are generally that late stage in retirement. Okay. So any questions on that before I move on to kind of getting a little bit more, in depth in these particular subjects? And I should mention as well, while I'm waiting for your answers, if there's more questions, that this workshop is definitely supposed to be educational. It's not supposed to be financial advice, tax advice, retirement advice, anything like that. This is more educational so that you can increase your knowledge. So not seeing any questions come through, so I'm going to kind of move on here. Okay, so let's talk about period 1. So period 1 is going to be basically right when you go from work to retirement. And if you were to read online and read a lot of retirement blogs or, whatever these little articles are on there, they're going to say, most people need somewhere between 60 to 80% of their pre-retirement income. And sure, I think that's a fair assessment, but I don't really think you should have that big of a window when, figuring out your expenses. I would like you to get very, very close to the best of your knowledge of what you're going to be spending right when you leave work, and how much it's going to take for you to actually be comfortable and meet your needs. A lot of people, I find, like to actually back into this equation, and they like to say, well, how much is my Social Security? How much are my pensions? What kind of income can I generate off my retirement savings? And then they basically make a budget out of that, and kind of live within that window. I think that's an okay way to go, but I don't really think that's the best way to go. I think the best way to go is to start with your ideal lifestyle and your ideal expenses, and then from there map out and then kind of quantify that with what you have saved and your pension numbers, your Social Security numbers, and see if it looks like it's a match. And if it's not a match, then maybe you can start to adjust some things at that point. But I don't want you to be thinking from a place of scarcity, to start, right? And I think if you are just figuring out, looking at some basic numbers and then working your way backwards, I think that's thinking about scarcity a little bit. So I want you to start with everything you want to do. And then from there, if you can't do it all at the beginning, we'll start prioritizing, right? So let's talk about period one. Okay, so period one is your go-go years. Okay, so in these years, when you leave work, longevity expenses are typically consistent, but there are some variables that can change pretty significantly. So, for example, if you enter your retirement with either a mortgage or car payments, most likely those may get paid off, right, at some point in your retirement. So when it comes to your go-go years, you may actually have some stages here, right? And this could actually go into the second period as well. But for most people, a lot of people buy a car right when they retire, and they'll do a car payment 3, 4, 5 years, low interest rate, zero interest rate. So that's paid off within, 3 to 5 years into retirement, and then that's going to go away. That's very common. But a lot of other people, might only have 1 or 2 years left on their mortgage. Again, these are things that you can adjust for, so that's going to be individual. One big thing that is relatively consistent is if you leave work before 65, okay? So if you leave work before 65, which is known as your Medicare, qualification age, then there might be a chance you need to find healthcare. Okay, I think healthcare is probably one of the biggest stresses that most people deal with that want to retire before 65. The cost can be highly variable, and there's a lot of ways to approach it depending on what options that you have at that time. If you have low income, then the marketplace might be a good place to go. The ACA plans. If you have high income, then you might want to look at, a private plan, or even continuing COBRA, right? If you have a COBRA option from work. So the thing is, if you do retire before 65, you might have a much higher healthcare cost than you would have after 65. Okay, so that for me is still going to fall in your longevity expenses because it's relatively fixed. It's not really a lifestyle thing, you could put it there, but I think it's more of a fixed cost that you're going to have to deal with for a certain amount of time. So if you are going to be retired before 65, that is something you're going to have to look at, okay? So in these go-go years, you want to map out, all your basic expenses, okay? So the place to start that I generally recommend is with a simple yellow pad, right? Actually, I like to do two things at once, but I think you should start with a yellow pad and just gather all your most recent statements, gather your most recent insurance statements. You can pull out your bank statements. You can pull up your, any bills that you're going to have, things like water, trash, electricity, those type of things, cell phone bill, right? Those, get all of these expenses together that are relatively fixed and that are going to generally stay the same. Once you get all that together, I like a yellow pad to start because it makes it real easy just to kind of put things together. Just to sit down and write out those expenses and total them up and see exactly what those are going to cost on average. Once you have a good picture of this will give you a base level of your longevity expenses to start with. So if you have things in there, like we mentioned, car payments, mortgages that are going to end at some point, you might want to create a little subcategory, put a little star next to those because those are going to end at some point. So when you actually start mapping out your retirement income plan, you're going to need to know when those are going to stop so that you can have sort of a stage in your retirement income planning. Okay. So once you get those mapped out, then you want to start to look at your fixed income sources, right? And if you look at let's say your Social Security, and if you have any pensions, if you work for, the government and many federal positions, you'll get a supplement that will cover you until 62 sometimes if you retire early, and then that's supposed to switch over until Social Security. But whatever your situation is, you want to figure out which all of your fixed expenses, your fixed income sources are going to be, right? So then once you have your fixed income sources and your fixed expenses, then what I want you to do is map out how much of your fixed income what percentage your fixed income will cover your longevity expenses, all your basic need. And if you're in a position where your fixed income sources between Social Security, pensions, and whatever else you may have coming in will cover your base expenses, well, that's a really good sign. That's a really good sign, because what that leaves us with is your lifestyle expenses can be determined by simply, your returns on your retirement assets, right? If your fixed income sources are less than your longevity expenses, your basic expenses, well, now we know we need to have some sort of secure amount of money in your retirement portfolio to make sure that you always have your longevity expenses covered regardless of the market, okay? So this is where it gets a little bit more tricky. But you want to make sure that you can cover all your base expenses regardless of what the market's doing, because ideally, you don't want to have all your money in investments, and let's say the market's down 10, 15, 20%, and now you have to draw and you have to sell shares during the time when the market's down. You don't want to do that. Ideally, if the market is down, you want to just let things ride, let them come back, and during that time, live off something that's more of a fixed income. So maybe at that point, you have some cash savings, you have some CDs, maybe, some bonds, things like that you can sell, short-term bonds that you can use to fund that particular portion, okay? But once you figure out the need that you have to cover your longevity expenses, then you could talk about lifestyle expenses. So this is where it can get highly variable depending on you, right? Because some people, they've had jobs where they've just traveled endlessly, for 30 years. And what they want to do, honestly, is just be at home and just be with family and really not do a whole lot of traveling. And, that's great. I think that's fine. So you may not need a lot of money set aside for lifestyle expenses. For other folks, they've been trapped in an office 8 to 10 hours a day for the last 5, 10, 20, 30 years. And they're ready just to get out, see the world, do whatever they want to do. If they find a good deal online on a trip or a cruise, maybe cruises are going to be a little while with the corona, but being able to just travel and get out and see the world and do the things that they want to do, which honestly, I highly recommend to include in your plan to do this as soon as possible. I've seen a lot of people that don't have a good understanding of their retirement income need, which therefore leads them to not spending money because they're not sure if they can spend it or if they're going to overspend too early. That's something that can lead to you having a health change, which doesn't allow you to do the things that you used to be able to do, right? So I highly recommend, as you're mapping out your lifestyle expenses, to create a list of, you can call them bucket list items or, whatever things that you want to do that are going to require more physical activity from you. And with those items, line those items up to be the highest priority for your initial expenses. So let me pause here for a second, see if there's any questions on that, and then we'll talk about kind of slow go years in just a moment. So Gary has a good question about long-term health care. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, actually, so that'll be part of our conversation in just a minute. Susie, I'm sorry, no-go years. I know it's tough, but we need to discuss those a little bit because this is a reality. We have to plan for that, and it could be actually quite expensive. So we're going to talk about that in just a moment here. So Kathy had a good ideas. Easy way to determine your current expenses is to download your checking account information by category and export it to Excel. Yeah, I'm going to talk about a couple of tools that I recommend as well. There's a few ways to do that, so all good stuff. But I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to move on here to period 2, okay? All right, so period 2 is going to be our slow go years. So those are generally, after the first 10 years of retirement, generally through the next 20 plus years. While we are still active, still able to move around, you're probably still driving at this point, taking care of yourself, things like that. So in this era, for period 2, when you're planning for your slow go years, most likely your longevity expenses are going to be very similar, right? So that's something that you're not going to have to change a whole lot. I mean, maybe you paid off your mortgage by now, cars are paid off, things like that. But maybe at this time, you want to do things that keep you a little bit more mentally active, right? So what I've seen here for lifestyle expenses is sometimes people, they take classes at the local college. They join, groups or activities that just keep them busy, things like that. So there might be some expenses in here that you didn't have before. And I do recommend you do things to keep your mind and your body active, because this is one of the things people really forget. And a lot of times when you see people pass away very soon after they retire, it's because they just go to a very sedentary lifestyle. You have to keep your body moving. You have to keep your joints active and oiled, right? Think about the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz. When he didn't oil his joints, he ended up freezing up and end up getting frozen at some point. So this is what happens to our bodies as we get older. So we want to keep our joints oiled. We want to keep our mind active and, doing challenging things. So, using crossword puzzles, taking courses, reading books, those type of things. Your lifestyle expenses could incorporate some of that, and then also probably some more, shorter travel. This is where I see a lot of grandparents going to visit their grandchildren at this point, because that's when the kids and the grandkids are growing up and being a lot more fun. Well, actually, they're always fun to play with, but they're the most fun, I think, when that between 3 to 7, 3 to 10, when they're moving around, they can talk, and just a lot of fun to interact with them. But I think the slow-go years are those years where you may be doing more domestic travel, probably not the big $10,000, $20,000 vacations. So when you are looking at period 2, this is something you'll have to decide for yourself, but you want to make sure when you look at your longevity expenses that you've included inflation, okay, in your cost. This is a big miss that I see a lot of people make, is that they don't account for inflation in their general costs. And if you remember, think about the cost of bread, the cost of gas back in the 90s, right? Back even in the early 2000s. I've talked about this a couple times. I bought the same bread for years and years. The bread I buy today used to be $2 or $3, and now it's like $5 or $6. There's a certain type of bread I like, and it's one of the things I splurge on. It's not cheap, but it is what it is. But that cost has doubled in just the last, let's say 10 years or so. So these are things that you want to include in your expenses, and you don't want to let it get away, okay? So when you're mapping out your longevity expenses, most people say somewhere between 2 to 3% inflation on that. So expect those costs to go up between 2 to 3% per year on average. And I think that's a pretty reasonable number to use. And then during this time, maybe some health things start showing up. Generally, not quite that much yet, when you're in your kind of late 60s, early 70s, that type of range. But these are areas where health costs could, be creeping up on you a little bit at this time. Generally, the health costs that creep up are things like medications, or basic medical procedures, not the big healthcare costs, which is kind of long-term care. Someone asked a question. It was, let's see here. Gary asked a question about long-term healthcare. Okay, so long-term care, the statistical likelihood, okay, of you needing some sort of assistance in your life is about 70%. It's you or your spouse, right? There's a 70% likelihood you're going to have to get some sort of assistance, whether that be in-home care or going to a long-term care facility, assisted care, somewhere in the middle, something like that. But there's about a 70% chance you're going to have to do that. There's a 55% chance that you're going to need some sort of paid care, right? And so that would be like the in-home care or going to a facility. So the way I look at long-term care, whether to buy an insurance or to self-fund, you probably want to make this decision, very early 60s, okay? So that would be in your go-go years. So this might be something you need to include in your longevity expenses if you are going to go the insurance route. But a lot of people talk about, the only thing I hear from people is, I've heard long-term care is expensive, but almost nobody's actually done the research or gotten a quote on a policy. And most people, when they do get a quote, they're working with somebody that's in like the broker field, right? So there's someone that's kind of the big name brokers, the Edward Jones of the world, the Merrill Lynch's, those types. And those places are really big fans of selling what are called hybrid long-term care insurance policies, which is basically a life insurance policy combined with a long-term care policy. It's basically a life insurance or annuity that has a rider that if you do have a long-term care need, it will flip onto that, right? So those will become more and more common. And I think if you have more than enough money, that could be a good way to go, because you can either buy that as a one-time purchase or over a number of years, but it's going to be 2 or 3 times as much as a traditional long-term care policy. So you have to be aware of that. Traditional long-term care policies, from what I'm seeing lately, are somewhere between $200 to $400 per person per month. So somewhere between $2,400 to $5,000 per year is kind of the general range, some higher, some lower. But those can also be customized to give you the amount of coverage you need. Okay. So the nice thing about being able to customize those policies is that if you have a good Social Security benefit, and let's say you have a pension coming in, you may not need a lot additional to cover like a full-time care type of facility. So you can kind of customize these policies the way that you need them. And so a lot of people just go to like, okay, I just heard they're expensive, and they never even like do the research. But, there are some other concerns, like I'm seeing policies go up 70% over 3 or 4 years. And this is a reality right now that we're dealing with, and it's quite scary. And I can totally appreciate if you do have a fear about policies going up. There are plenty of companies that have had policies, in force since the 90s that have never raised their cost. But we are seeing some of the bigger name companies jump up quite quickly. And so, if you are set on a certain budget and then you get to 73 years old and you're still relatively healthy, you don't need this policy right now, and then your policy jumps up 20 or 30% in a matter of years, that can be very impactful to your cash flow plan, which was what we're talking about today, your income need. So, another way to look at it is, do you want to self-fund your long-term care costs? Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about that once I kind of give you a roadmap here on how to do this. So bear with me on that. But Gary asked a good question, so I wanted to touch on that question. So if you are going to be going the policy route, actually, I think you should start with mapping out your plan. And then your plan will tell you, okay, does it look like I can afford long-term care out of my own funds based on my income need and how much I have saved, or should I take the safer route and get the long-term care insurance, and then you don't have to worry about as much. So that's something early 60s you probably want to be looking at there, okay? If you look before 60s, you'll get a better price, but then you're paying for more years. The likelihood that you need it before 60 is very low. So I usually say starting around 60, 62 to be looking into that to make a decision. 55 would probably be the earliest I would say on that, okay? Excuse me. Let's talk about the sad part that nobody wants to talk about, okay? And this is a reality, okay, folks? Like, we don't want to talk about this stuff, but there's going to be a time in your life, which we're calling the no-go years. This is much more of a stationary time. This is more for most people. If you make it to 65, your expected longevity is somewhere about 84, 85 for men and 86, 87 for women. And that's the average, right? So that means about 50% of people are going to live longer. If both spouses are currently 65 today, there's a 51% chance that one of you is going to live to 91. Okay. So there might be a good amount of time in these no-go years. And with the medical advances that are coming, just so you know, I do keep up on my, my retirement planning education. And pretty much every, when you go to these workshops and these big seminars to learn about the latest trends in retirement, they'll bring a medical professional a lot of times that really tries to help us understand that there are some major medical advances happening right now. And, with things like artificial intelligence and just the advancement we are able to make with creating drugs, we're going to see a lot of people living a lot longer. If you haven't heard, they're now 3D printing certain organs, right? So they can replace things like livers, and they've already built out hearts. And I know they're doing tests right now. This is not stuff that's on the market yet. But replacing things like faulty organs is going to be a reality in the next 5 to 15 years. And within 15 years, they expect the cost to be very reasonable. So even, someone of average means will be able to replace certain organs so that they can stay alive longer, not have to wait for a certain transplant. They're going to create these out of your own cells, right? So likelihood that they'll be successful is much higher, and the cost is going to be much lower. On top of that, we've learned a lot more about nutrition and making sure we're staying healthy. And then also with artificial intelligence, they're going to be able to design drugs that are specifically tailored to you and your needs. So this is all stuff that's coming. So I don't want you to just plan that you're going to pass away at 75 really early. It may happen, but I would rather see you plan for at least an average, life. So 84, 87, at least maybe even 90 or 95 as a starting place to make sure that you're going to be in good shape financially. Okay. So these no-go years, maybe, any years from like the 20 plus beyond, years in retirement. So let's say 85 plus or 80 plus, somewhere in that range. And this is a time when most lifestyle expenses tend to lower, and they're basically basically at zero at this point. If you're not doing a whole lot, you may be giving some money away, or sending, charity, still contributing to charity, but you are probably not going to have big old fancy vacations at this point. Probably not going to be buying a bunch of brand new cars at this point, or you're not going to probably moving up in house. If anything, you might downsize to go from a 2 level to a 1 level, things like that during this time. So there are other things though that can significantly increase, right? So these are things like your care. If you need more additional medical care, or even going to a long-term care facility. Okay. So most people have not thought out this far in their retirement plans. And as I mentioned before, a really big miss is that they do not include increasing their hard dollar cost due to inflation, right? So like I said, a reasonable inflation number, somewhere 2 to 3%. I mean, I usually use 2.5 to 3.5 personally, just to be a little bit more on the conservative side to make sure we're going to be good. And but for medical costs, they are expected to go down in the future, but I still don't expect that yet. Most medical costs, like long-term care costs, if you look up, state by state, on average, those have increased about 5 to 7% per year. So if you're looking at your long-term care costs, you're going to have to use a different inflation number than you would just for your general expenses, right? So what does this mean? So this means that, like, let's say in an average state, if you're going to have in-home care, somebody to come in maybe 32 hours a week and just help you out at this time, in today's dollars, it's usually about $54,000. That's kind of the average cost if you look nationwide. Some states are higher, some states are lower. But in 25 years, so let's say you were currently 63 and you wanted to plan until 90. So at 88 to 90, you're going to need to cover long-term care costs. And the average stay for men is about 1.5, 1.6 years. Average stay for women is about 2.5 years. So if you're a couple, we like to plan for at least 4 years total of long-term care coverage that we would need. So if we were to look at what that would cost in 25 years at 5% inflation, today it'd be $54,000 per year. And in 25 years, that would be $186,000 per year. Okay? So that's, over triple the cost between now and when you may need it in retirement. So this is a very, very serious thing to consider, because that's $186,000 per person, right? So if you have a couple, it might double that. And this is for in-home care at $54,000. If you were to go to a facility, and facilities are running somewhere generally between $8,000 to $10,000 a year, that cost is going to be more in the neighborhood of $300,000 per year per person in the future. So this is why it's so important to really understand when you're figuring out, should I buy the long-term care insurance, should I not, and then also how you invest your money in retirement. It might feel good to keep everything in, CDs or very safe investments, but with what CD rates are paying now, which is basically nothing, that money's not going to keep up to cover a long-term care cost of, $186,000 per person per year, unless you have a lot of money, right? And maybe if you have enough money to do that, then that's fine, but most people don't, right? So, long-term care is something I really want to make sure you build into your cash flow plan for, let's say, the last 2 years of your overall plan. And, if you are 63 today, you can use the numbers that I gave you. Start at $54,000 in today's dollars, or use $186,000 per year in the future. But if you want to have facility care, then you're going to have to use some bigger numbers there, right? So that's more, like I said, like $100,000 a year. Some states are more. And if you have, dementia, something like that comes up, then you have to go to what's called memory care. And memory care adds about $2,000 a month on top of your average cost. So this is why I really emphasize thinking about long-term care early, because most people don't. And I'm just being very honest with you. Most people do not think about this at all. And so I want you to, deal with the fear, right? And deal with that uncomfortableness, and deal with the sad face like Susie gave me for during these times, because if you have a plan, you at least know what to do. The scariest thing I think about going into retirement is going in without a plan. So this is why we're very focused on creating retirement plans to make sure people have a roadmap for those things that they're going to have in place. Okay. So hopefully this was helpful. I want to talk to you about where to start now. Okay. Let me see if there's any other questions here that have come through. Let's see here. Okay, so there's some questions that I'll get to at the end here. All right, so where do we start? Okay, so number one, you need to get a realistic picture of your future expenses. So if you're not retired yet, there's going to be some things that change, right? For those of you that have been working at home, I've heard a lot that I'm not spending as much money on gas. My insurance has gone down. I'm not spending money on clothes. So there are going to be things that go down in cost, but there will also be things that possibly go up in cost. So, getting a really clear picture of your future expenses. And as I mentioned, just start with a yellow pad, or a piece of paper. Make it very simple. You can also use an electronic option to automate much of the heavy lifting for you. So if your bank has the ability to help you categorize all these things, your main spending accounts, that might be a good place to start. Another good place to start could be Money in Excel. So if you're an Excel person, Excel has a new module that's called Money in Excel, and I've heard great things about it so far. I haven't really gotten into it too much, but you can actually now connect your accounts in Excel, which will then track all your expenses and categorize things for you. And apparently it's supposed to be pretty good. So that's, if you're an Excel person, you can use that. Another one to think about is mint.com, mint.com. That could be one to track you as well. That one works well. I'm just not as big a fan of it because they basically sell your info. So any of these things that are free, that means you're the product, right? So, Mint's okay. It's a good place. It's an okay place to start. It works well, but then you're opening your info to be marketed to. So, not as great. Excel we probably preferred over that. There's another program that I've heard a lot of people really like called You Need a Budget. And that one I think is like $30 a year. I'm not sure of the cost. I know there's a cost to that, but a lot of people swear by it and they really enjoy it. And then another one is called Tiller Sheets. So Tiller. The website is tillerhq.com. And that one is basically, it's similar to Excel, but if you have something called Google Sheets, which is Google's, free spreadsheet platform you can use, Tiller HQ hooks in with that. And I actually think it hooks in with Microsoft Excel as well. But there you can connect all your accounts and then it will automatically categorize things for you. And you can go in there and then finalize all the calculations. So one of those sources, I'm a big fan of using technology to make things easier, but I know some folks just prefer the old school way. And so maybe pulling up your bank statements or just sitting down and going through your credit card statements and using pen and paper to categorize everything out and see what you're spending on average per category to help you create your foundational cash flow plan. Whatever tools you like, that's going to be the first place to start. Okay. All right. So number 2, once you understand your current expenses, I want you to consider your goals for your go-go and your slow-go years. Okay. I want you to really take time and without looking at the cost at first, start mapping out goals, start mapping out things you want to do, things that are most important to you, those bucket list items that you've always wanted to do. And that could be things like, fixing up the house, new roofs, new kitchens, vacations, giving money to kids or grandkids, funding college for others, giving to your church or whatever charities are important to you. But these are things that are not necessarily requirements, but those are more of like lifestyle, like we said. Those are choices that you get to make on how you direct your funds. So then sit down and start mapping out all of those expenses and try to get a realistic, rough number in a sense on what those are going to be per year. Once you get that figured out, then you can start looking at your overall income need. But one thing, number 3 that I want you to consider from here is to start researching medical and long-term care costs for your state. Okay. And I want you to estimate the cost in 20 to 25 years, like I mentioned before, if the cost were to raise 5 to 7% per year. And then once you have this info, then you can start deciding if long-term care insurance or self-funding long-term care is going to be the better way to go for you. I talk with a lot of folks that have more money than they need. So self-funding just seems like the best way to go because we're not throwing money away on an insurance policy we may never need. But if it doesn't look like you can self-fund, then you may just want to stick, getting some long-term care insurance into your foundational budget. So then that way that's covered and you're taken care of in the future. And if you were to ever run out of money, at least you have your base expenses covered. Okay, I think that's going to be most important for a lot of people. There was a question about that here actually. Let's see here. Okay, I think I lost the question here, but that's okay. Someone's asking me if I know about healthcare costs. So healthcare costs for early retirement are going to vary widely. I've done a bunch of workshops. So if you do a search in the group here or search on my page for healthcare and retirement, I've talked about that quite a bit. That if you make below a certain income, which if you're not in California, because California's is higher, so generally it's about $67,640. I believe that's what the number is. Don't quote me on that. It's around $67,000. So if you're modified adjusted gross income, so your AGI, your income is $67,000 or below for a couple, or I believe it's $45,000 or below for a single person, then you can possibly qualify for a subsidy for the ACA, the Affordable Care Act insurance, also known as Obamacare. You'd find your options at healthcare.gov or by speaking to a broker. Those costs are going to be anywhere from $0 to $800 or $900 a person on average. I've seen them higher, but $0 to $800 to $900 per person on average is going to be your range. So you really want to get that number if you're going to retire before 65 to build that into that plan, because that's going to be a big expense. It's only going to be a short-term expense. It's not going to be forever type of thing. Once you switch to Medicare, that'll drop down quite a bit lower, on the $300 to $400 range for everything, including your Part D and all that. Okay, so once you have those things in order, number 4 is, I would start, if you're just doing this on your own, just start by using one of those online Monte Carlo, the Monte Carlo tools, just to start to get an idea of how your retirement looks. If you've never heard of a Monte Carlo, what it is, it's a simulation that runs about 1,000 scenarios and gives you kind of a number between 1 and 100 or 0 and 100 of your chances to making it to whatever age you select in retirement. The Monte Carlo is better than nothing. It's not really great, but it's better than nothing. But I would say to start there, and if it looks like, your Monte Carlo is saying 100%, well, that might even be too high, and you might want to consider spending a little bit more, and enjoying some time in retirement. If you're down at 50%, what that means is in 50% of the simulations, you run out of money. So that's not good either, right? So you want to find a number you're comfortable with, and you can look at it like a grading scale, right? 90 to 100 is an A, 80 to 90 is a B, 70 to 80 is a C, and below 70, you're looking at D's and F's, right? So I'm not saying you can't make it without that, but the chances of you running out of money become higher and higher the lower you go with that number. So if that number looks really good, great. If it looks more around, 70, 80, something like that, you probably really want to get very detailed on your retirement income plan to make sure that you are really tracking your expenses and that you're not going to get off track over the long term. Okay. Concurrent with that, or parallel with that, I would highly recommend you create a retirement income plan that maps out these expenses in detail. And it includes inflation, okay? Because inflation is very real. A lot of people forget this. And the cost of living today, in 10 or 15 years is going to be thousands of dollars higher, most likely, if if things go up as they have been the last 10, 15, 20 years. So you really want to be thinking about that. And then on top of that, we have this big national debt that we've expanded significantly in this last year because of the coronavirus. And inflation is probably one of my biggest concerns right now for retirees, because if the cost of, there's kind of two sides to look at it, right? If you have a lot of money in the market, and we just passed something called, the U.S. just passed something called the USMCA, which is going to bring a lot of manufacturing back here. There was just a deal that was brokered between Kodak to be bringing a lot of drug production back here, which is supposed to bring about 350,000 jobs. So we're going to bring a lot of manufacturing back to the U.S., so there's probably going to be a lot more jobs coming as long as we continue on the track we're going today. If for some reason we have a huge tax increase, or things get changed where it's more beneficial to move factories back out of the North America, we could see some changes in the future. But if things go as planned, the costs of goods are probably going to go up, right? I think most people right now are willing to pay because we saw what happened when the COVID first hit. And the big boat of face masks got turned back to China for their needs, and we didn't have what we needed here. And same thing with the drugs that are getting produced. So I think most Americans are okay with paying $1 or $2 more for certain things. But if you're on a fixed income in retirement and your income is not going up as fast as the cost of living, that can be quite stressful. So I really want to make sure that as you're mapping out your plan and as you're mapping out what you can spend, you include inflation for expenses over time. Okay. And then once you get this mapped out and you can see sort of year by year what your expenses are going to be, what you're going to need to do the things you want to do, then you can start to look at how much return you need to make on your investments, if you have any, but how much return you need to make on your investments to be able to fund your goals, okay? And if let's say you mapped out your whole plan, you mapped out all your expenses, you included inflation, and you look at your investments, and as long as you made 2% average, you'd be able to meet your goals. Well, then you're looking really good, right? That's a really good place to be, for retirement. But if you're more on the side where you need to make 8 or 9% on average just to meet your goals, well, that's a little bit scary, and that's not something, I would probably recommend you make some adjustments so that you can meet your goals with a lower required return on your investments, because that's going to be challenging to keep up with on a regular basis. So everyone's going to be somewhere in the middle there. But you really want to get this stuff mapped out and get very clear on it. And this is basically the foundation of your retirement plan. And it's going to take you some time, okay? It's going to take you some time to pull everything together, to go through the numbers, to map it all out, to use some basic math, but it is a necessary exercise before you take the leap. I would highly recommend you do this before you retire, not after you retire, okay? So, I mean, these are things I'm just trying to do my best to give you my best advice on and try to help you out with, because these are things that I see every single day. And some people do them, some people don't, and some people just want help with it, right? So if you're somebody that wants help, I'm going to throw up my website here. I'm happy to schedule an appointment with you and chat with you about your retirement planning situation. If you want help with this stuff, if it overwhelms you and you're just not the type of person that wants to sit there in Excel for hours and hours, mapping this all out and then possibly even making a mistake somewhere, if you want to get some guidance on this, you can go to my website here at keepitsimplefinancial.com/talk. I offer a free consultation. We'll spend about 45 minutes discussing your situation. We'll ask you some questions about what you're doing and what may be going well, what you may need to fix. And if there's some things there that look like they may need my help, then I can talk to you about that and getting some professional assistance. But if there's a better resource, then I'm going to direct you to that resource as well. So keepitsimplefinancial.com/talk. I think felt like I was off center there. I have the OCD in me. Okay, so that's more centered. I'd love to chat with you. So I'm going to stay on for a minute or two and answer questions. If you guys have any questions, I'm going to search through what you have asked so far. So I want to say thank you for attending today, by the way. If you watch this whole thing, I really appreciate you. But now I'm going to take some time to answer questions and see what we get here. Okay. Right. So let's start here with Michelle's question. Michelle has a couple questions. All right. So do you know what what state pays and what the retiree pays for health insurance? So this actually varies quite a bit, Michelle, depending on the school district. I've seen some school districts that will take care of your health care completely until 65, because a lot of teachers, or let's just say education professionals, because it can include administration, once you get in, 30 years or so, and you may start your career at 25, you can retire as early as 52, 55, or 60. So I've seen a lot of schools provide 100%. I've also seen some just give a stipend, right? They might give you $500 a month until 65 or $800 a month until 65, and then you have to cover the difference. So this is something I would actually recommend you speak directly to your school district about, in your HR department, to find out what you get, and then you can use these numbers to map into your specific plan. Okay. All right. Let's see here. Okay. Sherry has a question here. Would you suggest going all out to pay off mortgage, or pay minimum mortgage and save extra for retirement if you have very little saved and are just 2 to 4 years away from retirement, otherwise debt-free? This is a challenging one, to be honest, Sherry. So two sides to it, okay? Mortgage interest rates have been so low, right? So some people are getting their refinancing now at 2.5, 2.75, but a lot of people have this 3.25 to 3.75. That's a lot of what I'm seeing now. And so that's a pretty darn low interest rate. The challenge now, which is probably a good thing, but with this new standard deduction of about $12,400 per person, most people are not really getting to write off any mortgage, interest or even their property taxes sometimes. So if that's the case, you may just want to pay off your mortgage. If you're very low on savings, the thing I don't want you to do is you have a paid off mortgage, but you're so tight on savings that if you had an emergency, that you wouldn't have any money, and then the first thing you do is run to do a HELOC or something like that to go into debt to then pay off these expenses. So, let's say you had to make a decision between having 12 months of mortgage payments or, keeping a little bit of interest and paying off the loan over time. I would want you to have some cash there. I wouldn't want you to drain your cash to zero, but that's going to be a little bit of a tough situation depending on kind of the overall plan. Let me just throw a wrench in there. I've seen people, I've had clients that between their Social Security and maybe a small pension, they can cover all their expenses if their house is paid off, right? Then it kind of leans more towards paying off your house, because then you're not making any payments every single month. So that's sort of a tough one, but I think I would highly recommend you don't have zero in savings going to retirement. I would recommend you have somewhere between 6 to 12 months at a minimum, okay? And then beyond that, then you can talk about paying off your mortgage and getting your expenses as low as possible. So it's kind of a toss-up between those two. So I hope that's helpful for you. I'd have to look at the situation in more detail to make a real educated decision, but that's how I'd think about it, right? Yeah, this is a good comment, Lupe. She's saying more people live to 100. So am I. And it's 110 or 120 over the next 20 or 30 years. It's going to become much more common. So this is why you need to plan for this longevity. I see a lot of people go in and just say, I'm going to plan to die at 82, so I don't need to plan that long. And it's like, well, okay, well, what if you don't, right? So you want to make sure that you are, you are really looking into these numbers in detail. Okay. All right. So thank you for the nice comments, everybody. Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate that. Thank you, Danielle, for the nice comments. Jeanette, I appreciate that. Kathleen, appreciate that. Patty says, my mom is 95, right? So, Patty, absolutely. I have a client whose parent is 103, and she still drives to the store once or twice a month to go get her groceries and back, right? I don't know if that's the best thing to do, but this is what's happening now is people are living a lot longer and are staying active a lot longer. So this longevity planning is so important, which is why I want you to focus on, making sure you have your retirement income plan to cover you to at least 90, maybe 95. And if you go early, then you know what, you might have a little bit left over, but that's going to feel better than ending up at zero and having to struggle for the last 5 years or 10 years, and not have any choices there. So hope this was helpful for you folks. If you want to chat with me personally, keepitsimplefinancial.com/talk. We'll spend some time working on your retirement. I try to make it the best time you've ever spent working on your retirement and give you a good game plan to walk away with. And if you want some help, I'm happy to help you out with that. But other than that, I'm going to call it a day. Have a great week. I look forward to speaking with you next week and over this week in the group. And we'll be talking very soon. I will say bye-bye for now. All right, folks? Talk to you later.